Hello, everyone. Welcome. Well, I'm finally back with another video. It's been a few weeks. Life just got busy there for a bit, but I'm excited to be creating with Spellbinders September club kits. I don't have all of them here, but I have a few, and I'm starting out with one of my favorites, the clear stamp and die of the month. This one is called Autumn Wishes. You can get the stamp set alone, but I love getting the dies. And I'm going to be doing a fun technique with the dies for this stamp set today. All of the clubs this month are autumn themed, and I love creating autumn cards. Next up, I have the 3D embossing folder. This one is called Pumpkin Patch. This one is a stunner. It's covered with pumpkins and sunflowers. The BetterPress of the month is called Windy Fall Leaves. It includes beautiful leaf press plates and 3 sentiments. And it has a die that you can use to cut out the sentiments. And then this is the registration template. You can use this with the plates, or you can go rogue and do your own thing. The sentiments say, "Thankful for you, sending autumn wishes," and my favorite color is autumn. And here we have the Glimmer Club called Friendly Thanks. I love this huge thanks sentiment, and then it includes a die to cut it out. And then you get a lot of coordinating fall-themed sentiments. The stencil of the month is also another favorite of mine. It has a great price point, and they're just a lot of fun to play with. This month's stencil is called Colorful Pumpkins. And as you can see, each stencil has different pumpkins on it, shapes and arrangements. And with the last stencil, you can color in all of the stems. And last, I have the bonus item that comes when you buy the Deluxe Caboodle kit, and that would include all of the kits. I love this little frog. This set is called Hoppy Halloween. I'll be creating with that for my last card. But for card number 1, I'm going straight for the 3D embossing folder. There are so many different techniques that you can do with this. But for today's card, I'm using a piece of watercolor paper. And I'm going to wet both sides down with a baby wipe. This will prevent the paper from cracking when I run it through my Platinum 6. And I am going to be watercoloring these pumpkins and sunflowers for the first card. So I'm going to run this through the Platinum 6. I like to run it through at least twice, get a nice deep impression. And I'm using some hot press watercolor paper, which is a very smooth watercolor paper. And both sides look really pretty. Let me hold this up close to the camera so you can see. But I'm going to be using this side for today's card. I'll start out by putting some anti-static powder down. I use 2 different powders. I like the powder in my little see-through bottle, but I like the brush on this powder better. And I'm putting it down liberally because I don't want any of the gold embossing powder that I'm going to use catching where I don't want it to be. I use my sticky mat to hold this down flat. Powder it up one more time. And then I'm going to be using some Versamark ink. This is a clear sticky ink and some Reflections Gold embossing powder. I'm not pressing down very hard at all with this ink pad because I just want to catch the highest ridges of the embossed pattern, if that makes sense. I don't want any of the ink going down into the pumpkins. I'm just trying to catch the outlines to this. And then I can pour over my gold embossing powder. And as you can see, it just catches the outlines. If you do happen to get some embossing powder where you don't want it to be, you can use a watercolor brush just to kind of brush it away. And then once this is fully covered, I'm going to preheat my heat tool for a minute, and then I can melt this powder. This is very thick, heavyweight watercolor paper, so it does take a little bit longer for the powder to melt. But this provides a beautiful gold outline to my images. And when this is fully melted, I'll kind of hold it up toward the camera so you can see how pretty and gold the lines are. Now let's get into the watercoloring. I have a palette of Mission Gold watercolors, and I'm using my sticky mat that goes to my Silhouette vinyl cutter to hold this down flat. The flatter I can get this piece of watercolor paper, the better, because I don't want the watercolor pooling where I don't want it to go. I'll start by coloring in the sunflowers. I'll paint the sunflowers with some yellow watercolor, and then I'll add a little bit of a darker orange, add shading. And I think I'll go ahead and paint in all of the flowers first, and then let that dry just a little bit so that the orange paint doesn't fully extend to the edges of each petal like it did in that first flower I painted. The embossed lines from the 3D embossing folder, as well as the heat embossed lines with the gold powder, create little wells for the paint. So this paint won't spread into the pumpkins, just kind of contains all of the ink, which is nice, and it makes for some really quick coloring. I did speed this up a little bit. I think this is the first time that I've used the debossed side of the paper, but it really worked well with this technique that I'm showing you. I'm loving how this is turning out so far. I'll go ahead and start painting in one of the pumpkins. I'm using some dark orange paint for the shadows. I'll put this at the base of the pumpkins and kind of up the sides, as well as at the top of the pumpkin. Later on, I do come in with even a darker orange to add deeper shadows. And then for the highlights, I'm going to use a yellow. Just kind of drop those in. I'm going to allow that to dry a little bit before I smooth out and blend out the colors together. And I'll start painting in all of the pumpkin stems. And again, as you can see, the green isn't mixing in with the orange because it's all very well contained. I'm painting in the green stems and leaves of the sunflowers as well while I have my green paint on my brush. So let's continue on with some more pumpkins. Again, I'm putting the dark color down first, and then the lighter color. It looks really cute, kind of feathered together like this, less blended. But as I said, I do go back and blend it in just a little bit more. The embossed gold lines resist the paint and the color, so I'm not covering up the gold outlines at all. This technique does take time to do, but it's time very enjoyably spent. I'm going to drop in some dark orange paint now and just put this in the nooks and crannies of the pumpkin. And this just adds a lot more drama to the scene and roundness to the pumpkins. This scene would look really cute with some teal pumpkins. I'll have to go back and try that. Or even some white pumpkins. This is where I go in and blend my colors a little bit better. And as you can see, it just gives it a smoother look. And then the rest of the pumpkins I'll do off camera. I'm going to drop in some brown paint in the centers of the sunflowers next. I'm going to allow this to air dry completely. And then I'm going to add some highlights using Spellbinders Splatter White Opaque Watercolor. My white gel pen just has not been working lately, and I really wanted there to be white highlights. So I'm just adding a little bit of water to this splatter white and adding dots to the centers of the sunflowers. And then I'll add lines to highlight some of the pumpkins. And I'm just painting them on with a small brush. I probably need a new white gel pen, but it still has a lot of ink in it, so I don't know why it stops working on me. Let me know if you guys have that problem with your white gel pens. The sentiment comes from the Glimmer Club. I'm going to use the large thanks and glimmer this with some orange foil. I'm using a smooth white cardstock to foil this. The smoother your cardstock, the better. Then I'll allow that to heat up. I ran it through my Platinum 6 already, and here is the result. I think that looks so pretty with the orange. I'm going to cut out the thanks. I also glimmered it with some brass foil, as you can see there, and that turned out really pretty too. But I wanted the orange foil on the thanks for my card. The die cuts out all of the little inner bits to the letters, and I think that looks so pretty. I'll just punch those out with my all-in-one tool. And now I can put this card together. I'll add some dot liner onto a piece of yellow cardstock. This is called Sun-Kissed. This will add a matte to my watercolored piece. Then I'm going to add a lot of tape runner behind this embossed piece. And I'm even going to add a little bit of liquid glue right along the very edges, just so they glue down flat. With the two different ways I embossed this panel, as well as all of the water I added to it, it is warped. So this will help it to lay flat. And then I can add both of my sentiments with some liquid glue. It's going to say, "Thanks for being a friend." And then this card is done. I'm not even going to add any embellishments to this. It's kind of busy as is. Here's a close-up look at card number 1. I love the gold outlines to this. And it's been a while since I've used my watercolors, so I had a lot of fun pulling those out and painting. For card number 2, I'll be using the clear stamp and die. This is a piece of peach sorbet cardstock. I'm going to stamp one of the larger images, or this is probably the largest image of the set, in the bottom left corner of this cardstock. For my fall time cards, I love using brown ink, and I have a lot of VersaFine Clair browns, or 3 anyway, that I use a lot, but I'm going for the lighter one called Acorn for this card. It just looks more fall-like to me with the brown ink. I stamped this out a couple of times. but I'll just show one stamping. And then for this card, I am going to pull out my Faber-Castell colored pencils. Each pumpkin is going to be colored in differently. I'll start with the big one in the middle. I'm putting some dark shadows down at the bottom. And then I'm going to pull even a darker brown, add deeper shadows. I'm allowing a lot of the beautiful cardstock to show through. That will be my highlights. And then I'll use my lightest colored pencil to kind of blend it into the light orange paper. So I'm just using 3 pencils on this first pumpkin. And I'm going to speed this up for the sake of time. When I'm using my colored pencils, I make sure to use very light pressure. I'll put on as many layers as it takes to build up the color. I don't want to burnish the paper by pressing down too hard. When you burnish the paper, it gets really shiny and it's hard to put layers over it. And you don't want to hurt your hand or make your hand tired while you're using your colored pencils, or you're never going to pick them up again. I love using colored cardstock as a base color for my stamped images. It takes less time to color in your images this way, and it provides a beautiful base color. As you can see, I'm allowing a lot of the peach color cardstock to show through as my highlights. This is a really fun image to color in. However, if you're not in the mood for coloring, you can just leave it blank without any color. The brown ink that I used to stamp it out, combined with the colored cardstock, just make it look elegant all on its own. However, I love using my colored pencils at any opportunity I get, so I wanted to color in this little image. I'll finish coloring in the leaves and the flowers with more beautiful fall colors. I love that the image has little berries mixed in with the leaves. And I'm going to go back in just a minute and add some darker shadows to my orange pumpkin. And I apologize, I kind of go off screen here a few times. But it's just basic, quick and easy coloring. Now I'm going to use the coordinating die to cut this out, but I'm just going to cut out the bottom left corner. I'm going to be doing some partial die cutting. I'll put this in my Platinum 6. If you have a bigger machine, it will be easier to do. But I didn't feel like pulling out my bigger machine, but it worked just fine. But I'm just going to cut out the very corner. And then I'm going to finish cutting this out with my paper trimmer. However, I always like to restamp it after I'm done with my coloring, so I was glad I didn't cut it out yet. I put it back in my Mini Misty, inked it up with more of the brown acorn ink, and stamped over it to freshen up the lines. And now I can finish cutting out the left and the bottom of this panel using my Spellbinders paper trimmer. I'm going to have to use my scissors just to kind of go around some of the leaves so I don't chop them off. I'm just being careful not to cut into my scene. I'll use my corner chomper to round the bottom left side of this piece of cardstock. This one is called Tangerine. And this will provide a really pretty matting for my main panel. I'll do the same with the card base. I'll use some tape runner to attach this to the card base. This was just handy. You could use glue, liquid glue as well, because these cardstocks are very thick and heavyweight. And then the set came with some really pretty sentiments, and I'm going to be using 2 of these. So this will say, Happy Thanksgiving to you and yours. I'll just use some liquid glue actually to glue those down in place. And then I have some beautiful taupe pearls that matched really well with this card. I'll put a few of these around the main image and around the sentiments. And let me give you a close-up look at card number 2. For card number 3, I'm going to play with the Stencil of the Month Club. This is a really fun and fast way to color in these pumpkins. I'm using some Simon Says stamp inks for this. They're positively saturated inks. I'm using one color for each stencil. However, to add a little bit of shading, I'm adding more ink at the bottom of each pumpkin just to darken it a little bit. If you wanted to, you could come in with a darker blue ink. This worked out really well. Let me show you how the first stencil turned out. And as you can see, the bottoms of the pumpkins are just a little bit darker. For stencil number 2, I'm using some orange. I'm doing the same thing by adding an additional layer of the ink at the bottom of each pumpkin. The cardstock that I'm using for this card is called Barely Peach. So it has a nice warm tone to it. Next, I'll use some green. And then for my last pumpkin color, I'm using a cappuccino brown, which is a light, beautiful brown. I'm using a microfiber cloth to clean my stencils quickly in between layers. But after I'm done with the card, I'm going to go in with a baby wipe and give it a really thorough cleaning. The last stencil will color in the pumpkin stems. And again, I'm just using one shade of green for this. And now my panel is completely done. I'm going to pull in an older set of dies, cut out a scalloped edge. This is called Stylized Border Trio. And I'm using this beautiful scallop die to cut out a piece of the stencil. And then I'm going to mat it with this dark timber brown ink. I have my thanks sentiment all ready to go, which I foiled with some teal foil. And I decided to pop up the main panel with some foam tape. I'll peel off the backing. And then I can attach this to the top of my 5.5 by 4.25 inch brown cardstock. The thanks sentiment, I'm just going to glue down with some liquid glue. This would look really pretty popped up with some foam strips. But for this card, I'm just going to glue it down flat. The last thing I'm going to do to this card is to add some gold, smooth, round discs. And here is card number 3, all done. I love the contrast of the matte colors at the top and then the bit of glimmer at the bottom. For card number 4, I'm going to use the BetterPress set. It comes with a registration template, and I'll show you what the finished product looks like. But if you use it, it just arranges the leaves beautifully for you. This is what it will look like. But I'm going to create a card using the leaves in a different way. I'll save this panel for another card. But I chose 3 of my favorite leaves from this set. And I'm going to stamp them out using some BetterPress ink and some different colors of cardstock. You can see that I have a red leaf at the top right. I'm going to cut out the other 2 leaves with some square dies and then frame them with some brown timber cardstock. And then with these 3 different leaves, I'm going to create a little scene on the front of the card. I'll run this through slowly through my Platinum 6. And the ink looks really beautiful on these different colors of cardstock. Let me show you here. Aren't those fun? Perfect for your fall time cards. I'm going to cut them out now with my Everlasting Square dies. They're all going to be different sizes. And then I can use the same dies to cut out frames for these. I ink blended a little more ink at the corners of these squares. I'm gluing the frames down flat. And then I can arrange these on the front of my card. I'll glue these flat onto some more timber brown cardstock. They would look really cute popped up with some foam squares too. But I do decide to use some foam strips behind the sentiment. I'll glue the other 2 leaves down. The sentiment I chose says, "My favorite color is autumn." That one was my favorite of the 3 sentiments. Actually, the frames I cut out with a lighter brown cardstock. I think I told you timber, but I used latte brown cardstock for the frames, and the background is timber brown. I added a couple of strips of foam behind my sentiment. I left a gap where it goes over the corner of the leaf frame, and I'll press that into place at the bottom of the card. I'm adding some smooth disc embellishments. I believe this is from a bag called Espresso. I will have all of the products linked in the description box below if you are interested in checking them out. And here's a close-up look at card number 4. On card number 5, I'm creating the background panel first using some Distress Oxide inks. I have a carved pumpkin, mustard seed, and candied apple. The cardstock I'm using is a piece of Bristol Smooth cardstock. It's a great cardstock for ink blending, but I don't want a really smooth blend here. I just want to mash these colors together for this card. And last, I'm using some black soot around the edges. And now I can start die cutting this adorable little die set called Hoppy Halloween. And again, this is a freebie if you buy the Deluxe Caboodle kit. I'm using some Royal Amethyst cardstock for the hat, and for the frog, I chose some light green Peridot cardstock. And then I'm going to do a little bit of ink blending around these pieces. Look how cute they are. Such a fun little set. So I'll blend some black soot around the edges of this hat. This adds some life to these die cut pieces. And of course makes them look a little more dimensional. The band around the hat is going to be tangerine orange. I'll just use my pickup tool to put that in place. Now I can put some ink around the frog. This is pine needles. I'm going to go all the way around the frog with this darker green. His belly I cut out with some yellow sun-kissed cardstock. And I'm using a little bit of orange around the edges of this. And then I can glue his belly on. There's even little pieces for his eyes and cheeks, as you see here. I'm just gluing on some pink cheeks for the frog. Behind the eyes, I'm going to use some double-sided adhesive. This will allow the eyes to stick inside the die-cut piece. And here you can see him with his eyes in place. I'll glue on the frog's hat. And then I'm going to work on my panel a little bit more. I'm using a Deckled rectangle in the middle of this panel, and this is going to help frame the frog. The frog die cut piece is so small that I just needed something to put behind him that was a bit smaller too. I'll show you what I'm going to do here. I'm going to add another piece of the purple cardstock, and again, that's Royal Amethyst Purple. It's a little bit larger than the opening there, so I'm going to glue that over the opening. And then I'll glue my die cut piece on top of that. Just creates a smaller frame for this frog. The die in the set says Trick or Treat, and I cut it out with yellow cardstock. I'm backing this with some black cardstock. This will make the sentiment pop a little bit more. And I am going to pop this sentiment up with some foam strips. I'll put that down first, and then I'll know exactly where to attach the frog. And I used more foam strips behind the frog. He's going to be just above the sentiment, not sitting on it exactly. The sentiment acts as an anchor, so he doesn't look like he's just floating in the middle of the card. Last, I'm going to add some purple pearls. These matched really well with the Royal Amethyst purple cardstock. I'll glue my panel onto a top folding white card base. And then I can give you a close-up look at this adorable card. If you used pattern paper instead of inking up your own panel, this card would be really fast to create. And you could create a bunch of them for Halloween. I hope you enjoyed today's video, and I hope you'll give some of these really fun techniques a try. Product links are in the description box if you want to check them out. I hope you're enjoying the beautiful fall season, and have fun, my friends, creating your fall time cards. I'll be back again soon with another video. Take care. Bye.